On the 20th day of August, 1917, I, Karl Heinrich, Count von Altberg-Renstein, Commander-Lieutenant of the Imperial Navy, consigned this bottle and my records to the abyss of the Atlantic Ocean at a point unknown to me, presumably near 20 degrees north latitude and 35 degrees east longitude, where my submarine U-29 lies helpless upon the ocean floor. I perform this act, driven by the desire to make public certain extraordinary facts, for there is no likelihood that I shall survive to recount them in person. The circumstances surrounding me are as menacing as they are inexplicable, involving not only the irreparable damage to the vessel, but also the fatal weakening of my once iron German will. At noon on the 18th of June, as was reported by radio to U-61 en route to Kiel, we torpedoed the British transport Victory, bound from New York to Liverpool. Coordinates: 45 degrees 16 minutes north latitude, 28 degrees 34 minutes west longitude. The crew was permitted to abandon ship, and it sank with remarkable spectacle. First the stern went under, then the bow reared high, and the entire hull descended perpendicularly, like a candle. Our motion picture camera recorded it all, and I regret that these scenes will never be viewed in Berlin. Afterwards, we fired upon the lifeboats with our deck gun and submerged. Yet when we surfaced again, just before sunset, there was found upon the deck the body of a sailor, his hands locked in death's grip upon the railings. The unfortunate man was young, dark-skinned, and strikingly handsome, likely an Italian or a Greek, certainly from the Victory. It appeared he had sought salvation aboard the very vessel that had destroyed his own, yet another victim of the sordid war unleashed by the English swine against the fatherland. Our men searched his pockets for souvenirs and found in his jacket an ancient fragment of ivory, carved with the head of a youth crowned in laurel. My comrade, Lieutenant Clens, judged the piece to be antique and of artistic worth, and therefore kept it for himself. How such an object could have come into the possession of a common sailor we did not even attempt to conjecture. When the body was cast overboard, two occurrences deeply disturbed the crew. The dead man's eyes had been closed, but as the corpse was dragged to the rail, they suddenly flew open, and many thought that the lifeless gaze fixed itself upon Schmidt and Zimmer, who bent over him with an indescribable mockery. The boatswain Muller, an elderly and simple Alsatian full of superstition, was so shaken that he followed the body with his eyes, even in the water, and later swore that it had not merely sunk into the depths, but spread its limbs like a practiced swimmer and sped southward beneath the waves. Clens and I disliked these displays of peasant ignorance, and we sternly reprimanded the crew, Muller most of all. Yet the following day brought fresh unease. Several sailors fell ill. All pointed to nervous exhaustion from the long voyage and dark, troubling dreams. Some appeared stupefied and despondent. Convinced they were not feigning, I relieved them of duty. The sea grew rough, and we again descended. There the turbulence was unfelt. The men grew calmer, though a strange southern current, absent from our charts, persisted. The groans of the sick were unbearable, but so long as discipline was not undermined, we refrained from harsh measures. We planned to remain in the area until intercepting the liner Dacia, of which agents in New York had informed us. Toward evening we surfaced. The sea had quieted. To the north, smoke from a squadron was visible, but distance and the ability to submerge kept us safe. Far more troubling was the babbling delirium of the boatswain Muller, which by morning had grown even more frenzied. He had fallen into a repulsive, almost childish state, raving of corpses swimming past the portholes and staring fixedly at the men, claiming he recognized them as victims of our glorious German victories. He further declared that the youth cast overboard was their leader. All this sounded grim and unhealthy, so Muller was chained and soundly beaten. The crew disliked the punishment, but discipline is paramount. We likewise denied the delegation led by Zimmer their demand to throw the ivory carving into the sea. On the 20th of June, the sailors Bohm and Schmidt, who had earlier fallen ill, lapsed into uncontrollable fury. Regrettably, among the officers there was no physician, for German lives are precious, but the endless ravings and dreadful curses of the two so threatened order that severe measures had to be taken. The crew met this in silence, but seemed pacified. Muller troubled us no more. In the evening he was released and returned wordlessly to his duties. The entire week we lived in tense expectation of the Dacia. The strain was worsened by the disappearance of Muller and Zimmer, who had undoubtedly committed suicide under the weight of their terrors, though none saw them leap overboard. I even breathed easier at Muller's loss. His very silence had lain upon the men like a dark burden. Now all strove to keep silent, as if suppressing some secret dread. Many remained unwell, yet none complained. Lieutenant Klenz, worn by impotence and strain, flew into rages over trifles, at the dolphins that gathered ever more frequently around U-29, or at the strengthening southern current absent from our charts. At last it became clear that we had missed the Dacia. Such failures occur, and we were more relieved than disappointed, for now we could set course for Wilhelmshaven. On the 28th of June, we turned northward and, despite comical hindrances from unprecedented shoals of dolphins, soon lay upon our course. The explosion in the engine room came at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and was wholly unexpected. There had been no defect in the machinery nor negligence of the personnel, yet the boat was shaken by a violent blow that made every rivet tremble. Lieutenant Klenz rushed below and found the fuel tanks and nearly the entire engine torn apart, while engineers Schneider and Robb were killed outright. Our situation became instantly hopeless. The chemical air regenerators remained intact, and we could surface and submerge so long as the pumps and batteries held, but the submarine could no longer move. To seek salvation in the boats meant surrendering to enemies senselessly embittered against the great German nation, and the radio had been silent since our last contact with U-61. From a moment of the disaster until the 2nd of July, we drifted gradually southward, without charts, encountering no ships. The dolphins circled U-29 incessantly, a remarkable circumstance given the distance traversed. On the morning of the 2nd of July, we sighted a warship under the American flag, and the sailors clamored insistently for surrender. At length Lieutenant Klenz was forced to shoot the sailor Trout, who most zealously urged the others toward this anti-German act. For a time the crew was subdued, and we submerged unnoticed. The following day dense flocks of birds swept in from the south, and the ocean raged in earnest. Battening down the hatches, we waited for calm until we realized that we must either dive or let the waves shatter us to pieces. The pressure in the compartments was falling, and with it our tension. We wished to avoid wasting our meager supplies, yet no choice remained. We submerged to a shallow depth, and when after several hours the sea grew quiet, we resolved to surface again. But a new misfortune arose. The boat refused to ascend despite all the engineers' efforts. The men were seized with terror at the thought of underwater imprisonment, and someone once more muttered of Lieutenant Klenz's ivory figurine but the sight of an automatic pistol quickly silenced them. We strove constantly to occupy these wretches with some task, tinkering with the mechanisms, though we knew full well it was futile. Cleanse and I usually slept at different times. When I was asleep, about 5 o'clock in the evening of the 4th of June, an open mutiny broke out. The 6 swine who still dared call themselves sailors, thinking they had caught us off guard, with savage fury sought vengeance for our refusal to surrender to the Yankees 2 days before. Growling like beasts, and beasts they were, they smashed tools and furniture, shouting delirious curses at the ivory talisman and the dark-skinned corpse that had bewitched them and fled. Lieutenant Cleanse seemed paralyzed and did nothing. But what else could be expected of those pampered, effeminate sons of the Rhine? I shot all 6, such was grim necessity. We expelled the bodies through the torpedo tube and remained alone in the boat. Lieutenant Cleanse grew nervous and drank without cease. We resolved to live as long as possible, relying on our ample stores of food and the air regenerators, none of which had been damaged in a mutiny. Our compasses, depth gauges, and other instruments of precision were destroyed. Henceforth we could depend only upon conjecture, the clock and calendar, and the drift we traced by objects visible from the conning tower and portholes. Fortunately, we still possessed spare batteries sufficient for a long time, both for interior lighting and for the searchlights. We often turned on the circular beam, but saw only dolphins swimming parallel to our course. Toward these dolphins, I felt a scientific interest, for the common Delphinus delphis is a cetacean mammal incapable of long endurance without air, yet I observed one swimming for nearly 2 hours without once rising to the surface. As time passed, Cleanse and I concluded that we continued to drift southward, sinking ever deeper. We observed the ocean's flora and fauna, read the books I had brought for rare moments of leisure. Yet I could not fail to note the diminished intellectual level of my companion. He lacked the Prussian cast of mind. He was prone to idle play of imagination. The fact of our inevitable doom strangely affected him. He often prayed in remorse for all the men, women, and children we had sent to the depths, forgetting that all is noble which serves the cause of the German nation. In time he grew markedly less restrained, gazing for hours upon the ivory figurine and weaving fantastic tales of treasures forgotten and lost in the ocean's abyss. At times, out of scientific curiosity, I encouraged him in these themes and listened to endless poetic quotations and legends of sunken ships. I pitied him. I did not wish to see a German suffer. Yet he was not a man with whom one could easily meet death. For myself, I felt pride, knowing that the fatherland would honor my memory and that my sons would grow into worthy successors. On the 9th of August, the ocean floor came into view, and we directed upon it the powerful beam of the searchlight. There unfolded a vast, undulating plain, covered chiefly with seaweed and strewn with shells of mollusks. Here and there appeared wavering objects of uncertain outline, shrouded in weeds and encrusted with barnacles. Cleanse insisted they were ancient ships resting in their graves. But most of all he was struck by one detail, an obelisk of solid material, rising 4 feet above the bottom, about 2 feet thick, smooth, with even sides and a flat summit. All its angles were sharply defined. I judged it to be an outcrop of rock, but Cleanse swore he discerned carvings upon it. Soon he began to tremble and turned away from the porthole, as if in fear. He could not explain his terror, repeating only that he was overwhelmed by the immensity, the gloom, the remoteness, the antiquity, and the mystery of the oceanic abyss. His mind was worn down, but I remained always a German, and noted two circumstances: that U-29 bore the pressure admirably, and that the strange dolphins still followed us, though the existence of higher organisms at such depths is denied by most naturalists. Perhaps I exaggerated the depth, yet it was sufficient to render the phenomenon remarkable. The rate of our southern drift remained within the limits I had calculated. On the 12th of August at 3:15, the poor Cleanse finally lost his reason. He was in the conning tower, lighting the way with the searchlight, when I suddenly saw him move toward the library section, and his face betrayed everything at once. I shall repeat here his words, emphasizing those he himself stressed. He calls. I hear him. We must go. Shouting this, he seized the figurine from the table, concealed it, and grasped my hand, trying to drag me from the cabin to the deck. I instantly realized that he meant to open the hatches and cast himself overboard, dragging me with him, a flash of suicidal mania for which I was unprepared. When I tore myself free and tried to calm him, he grew more frenzied, repeating, "Let us go now. We must not wait. Better to repent and be forgiven than to scorn and be damned." Then I declared him mad, but he was unyielding, crying, "If I am mad, it is mercy. May the gods pity the man who in his stubbornness remains sane to the ghastly end. Come, and be mad while he calls in mercy." This outburst seemed to relieve the pressure upon his brain. Having shouted himself hoarse, he grew gentler, begging leave to depart alone if I would not follow. I made my decision. He was a German, but only a Rhinelander and a plebeian, and now a potential danger. By granting his suicidal request, I could rid myself at once of one who was no longer a comrade but a threat. I asked him to leave me the figurine, but this provoked such hideous laughter that I did not persist. Then I inquired whether he would leave at least a lock of hair as a keepsake for his family in Germany, should I by chance survive. But again he laughed aloud. So he climbed the ladder, and I went to the levers and at the appointed intervals performed the act that doomed him. Assured that he was no longer in the boat, I turned on the searchlight in hope of seeing Cleanse one last time. I wished to learn whether the pressure had crushed him or whether his body remained intact like those extraordinary dolphins. But I did not succeed, for the dolphins clustered thickly around the tower. That evening I regretted not having secretly taken the figurine from poor Cleanse's pocket, for even the memory of it enchanted me. I could not forget the beautiful youthful head crowned with leaves, though I am by nature no artist. I was saddened also that I had no one left to speak with. Cleanse, though not my equal in intellect, was better than utter solitude. That night I slept poorly, pondering when the end would come. My chances of salvation were almost gone. The next day I ascended to the conning tower and began my customary exploration with the searchlight. To the north the view was the same as for the previous 4 days, yet I sensed that the drift of U-29 had markedly slowed. When I turned the beam southward, I discovered that the ocean floor ahead had grown considerably deeper. In certain places there appeared stone blocks of astonishingly regular form, as though laid by human hands. The boat did not at once descend to this new depth, and I was obliged to labor in order to direct the searchlight vertically downward. From the sharp bend the wire contacts parted, requiring repair. At last the light once more flooded the abyss beneath me. I am not one to yield to emotion, yet what was revealed in the electric glow filled me with profound astonishment. Though trained in the finest traditions of Prussian culture, I should not have been surprised, for both geology and ancient legends speak of vast displacements of oceanic and continental masses. Before me stretched a broad and intricate ensemble of ruined buildings of majestic, yet wholly unfamiliar architecture, preserved in varying degrees. Most seemed to be of marble, dazzlingly white in the beam. The general plan indicated a vast city lying at the bottom of a narrow valley, with countless temples and villas scattered upon the gentle slopes. Roofs had collapsed, columns had broken, yet the spirit of immemorial grandeur, which nothing could destroy, still hovered there. Confronted at last with Atlantis, which I had once deemed mere myth, I became its ardent investigator. Through the valley floor a river had once flowed. Looking more closely, I discerned remnants of marble and stone bridges, embankments, terraces, and quays, once buried in greenery. In my enthusiasm, I nearly fell into the same sentimental rapture as poor Cleanse, and too late I noticed that the southern current had wholly ceased, allowing U-29 to sink slowly downward upon the sunken city, like an aeroplane coming to land. Equally belated was my realization that the shoal of strange dolphins had vanished. Within 2 hours the boat rested upon a square beside the rocky wall of the valley. On one side lay the view of the entire city, descending from the square to the ancient river embankment. On the other, in astonishing proximity, towered the richly adorned and seemingly uninjured facade of a colossal edifice, evidently a temple, hewn from the living rock. Of the true state of this titanic structure, I could only conjecture. The facade of incredible dimensions clearly concealed a vast interior space. Within it gaped numerous windows of varied purpose. At the center yawned a great open door, approached by a stone stairway that overwhelmed the imagination. The portal was framed with the finest carvings, presumably of Bakshik subjects. All was crowned with enormous columns and friezes adorned with sculptures of indescribable beauty, idealized pastoral scenes, processions of priests and priestesses bearing strange ritual objects and worshipping a radiant deity. The art was of phenomenal perfection, largely Hellenistic in aspect, yet possessed of a curious independence. It shattered the sense of dreadful antiquity, as though created later than the immediate heirs of Greek art. Every detail of this massive creation seemed part of the valley's slope, though I could not conceive how the immense interior had been carved. Perhaps it was founded upon a natural cavern or chain of grottos. Neither time nor submersion had marred the august sanctity of this dreadful sanctuary, for it could be nothing but a temple, and to this day, after millennia, it stands untouched, unprofaned, in the endless night and silence of the ocean abyss. I cannot reckon how many hours I spent gazing upon the sunken city, its houses, arches, statues, bridges, and colossal temple. Though I knew death was near, curiosity consumed me, and I sent the beam of the searchlight in ceaseless quest. The column of light revealed countless details, yet refused to illumine anything within the gaping doorway of the rock-hewn temple. From time to time, I cut the current, mindful of the need to conserve energy. The beam was now much weaker than in the first weeks of our drift. As though sharpened by the coming farewell to life, within me grew the desire to penetrate the ocean's mysteries. I, son of Germany, will be the first to tread these paths forgotten for millennia. I brought forth and examined the metal deep-sea diving suit. I experimented with the portable lamp and the air regenerator. Though it would be difficult to manage the double hatch alone, I believed I could overcome all obstacles, and with the skills of a scholar walk through the dead city. On the 16th of August, I made my exit from U-29 and traced a path through ruined, silt-buried streets toward the ancient river. I found no skeletons or other human remains, but I did discover a wealth of archaeological material, from sculptures to coins. Of this, it is impossible to speak in a few words. I can only express sorrow for a culture that flourished in its glory at a time when cave dwellers roamed Europe and the Nile flowed into the ocean unseen by any eye. Others, guided by these notes, should they ever be found, may one day reveal to mankind the secrets I can only hint at. I returned to the boat when the batteries began to fail, resolving to explore the cavernous temple the following day. On the 17th of August, I suffered the greatest disappointment. I discovered that the materials required to recharge my lamp had perished during the mutiny in June. My rage was boundless. Yet German reason forbade me to risk stepping unprepared into the impenetrable darkness, where there might lurk the lair of some indescribable sea monster or a labyrinth from which I could never escape. All I could do was switch on the weakening searchlight of U-29 and with its aid ascend the steps, studying the exterior carvings. The column of light struck the passage from base to summit, and I strove to discern something within, but in vain. Not even the ceiling was visible, and though I took a step or two inside, carefully testing the floor, I dared go no further. Moreover, for the first time in my life, I felt true horror. I began to understand the moods that had overtaken poor Cleanse, for though the temple drew me ever more strongly, I felt before its depths a blind, animal fear. Returning to the submarine, I extinguished the light and pondered in darkness. Electricity must be preserved for the direst need. Saturday the 18th, I spent in utter blackness, tormented by thoughts and memories that threatened to break my German will. Cleanse had gone mad and perished before ever reaching these ruinous relics of an unimaginably distant past, and he had called me to follow. What if fate had indeed preserved my reason only to lure me irresistibly toward an end more dreadful and inconceivable than man can imagine? Truly my nerves were strained to breaking, and I was bound to cast off such impressions. They are for the weak. All Saturday night I lay sleepless, turning on the light without thought for the future. It vexed me that the electricity would fail before the air and provisions. I returned to the thought of an easy death without torment and examined my automatic pistol. Toward dawn, I must have fallen asleep with the light still burning, for I awoke already in darkness, discovering that the batteries were utterly dead. I struck match after match, bitterly regretting the improvidence with which our few candles had been squandered. The head of the radiant deity on the carved statues of the Rockhun temple was the very same as that upon the fragment of ivory which the dead sailor had brought from the abyss, and which poor Cleanse had carried back into the depths. I was astonished at this coincidence, but not horrified. Only a feeble mind hastens to explain the unique and complex by primitive references to the supernatural. The coincidence was strange, yet I remained too sober in judgment to connect the unconnectable or wildly associate the chain of events that had led from the affair of the Victory to my present dreadful condition. Feeling the need for rest, I took a sedative and again surrendered to sleep. My nerves betrayed themselves in dreams. I heard the cries of the drowning, saw dead faces pressed against the portholes. Among those faces was one still alive, the mocking visage of the youth with the ivory figurine. To describe my awakening must be done with utmost caution, for my nerves are wholly shattered, and hallucinations now intertwine with fact. Physiologically, my case is of extreme interest, and it is a pity that competent German specialists will never be able to study it. Opening my eyes, I first felt an all-consuming desire to revisit the rock temple. The desire grew with every moment, but I almost automatically suppressed it with fear, acting as a reliable brake. Then upon me descended the sensation of light amid utter darkness. I seemed to behold a phosphorescent glow in the water, streaming through the portholes facing the temple. This stirred my curiosity, for I knew of no deep-sea organisms capable of emitting such intense light. But before I could reason it out, another sensation came, a hallucination of hearing, so irrational that it made me doubt the objectivity of all my senses. It was a rhythmic, melodious sound, like a wild yet beautiful choral hymn, seeming to come from outside, through the utterly soundproof hull of U-29. Convinced of my mental abnormality, I struck several matches and took a large dose of sodium bromide, which seemed to calm me until the illusory sound vanished. Yet the glow remained. It was hard to resist the urge to approach the porthole and seek its source. The light seemed so real that soon I could distinguish familiar objects by it. I even saw the empty bromide vial, though I did not recall where it lay. This last circumstance intrigued me. I crossed the cabin and touched the vial. It was indeed there. Now I understood that the light was either real or else part of a hallucination so persistent that I could not hope to suppress it. Therefore, abandoning resistance, I ascended to the conning tower to see what truly shone. Perhaps another submarine, bringing salvation? It is well that the reader believes none of this, for when events transgress natural law, they inevitably become subjective and unreal creations of my overstrained mind. Upon reaching the tower, I found the sea glowing far less than I had expected. What I saw was not grotesque or terrifying, yet the vision robbed me of the last remnants of trust in my own consciousness. The entrance and windows of the submarine temple, carved in the rock, shone distinctly with a flickering radiance, as though from a mighty lamp blazing within. The events that followed are chaotic. As I gazed upon the dreadful glow, I was seized by an extraordinary illusion, so extravagant that I can scarcely describe it. I dreamed I discerned within the temple objects, both motionless and moving. It seemed the spectral hymn I had heard upon first awakening sounded again. And above all rose thoughts and fears centered upon the youth lifted from the sea, and the ivory figurine whose likeness was repeated upon the friezes and columns of the temple before me. I thought of poor Cleanse, where now lay his body with the idol he had borne back into the ocean. He had warned me of something, and I had not heeded, for he was a soft-hearted Rhinelander, driven mad by events which a Prussian endures with unbending fortitude. After this all was simple. My urge to go forth and enter the temple became an inexplicable and commanding summons, impossible to resist. My own German will no longer govern my actions, and from this moment effort of will is possible only in trivial matters. The same madness that drove Cleanse to his death, unprotected, bareheaded, into the oceanic abyss, now claims me. Yet I am a Prussian and a rational man, and to the end I shall use what little remains. When I first realized that I must go, I prepared my diving suit, helmet, and air regenerator for immediate descent. I completed this hasty chronicle of events in the hope that it may someday reach the world. I shall seal the manuscript in a bottle and commit it to the sea when I leave U-29 forever. There is no fear in me, even after the prophecies of mad Cleanse. What I have seen cannot be true. I know it is my own madness, explained chiefly by oxygen starvation. The light in the temple is pure illusion, and I shall die calmly, as a true German, in the black and forgotten depths. That devilish laughter I hear as I write these lines sounds only in my failing brain. Therefore, I carefully don my suit and bravely ascend the steps into the ancient temple, into that silent mystery of immeasurable waters and countless years. Ladies and gentlemen, if this tale, found in a sealed bottle, has reached your eyes, subscribe to our channel, lest you miss new chronicles from the abyss. Share your thoughts and conjectures in the comments, for even through the thickness of years and waters, it will gladden me to feel your interest.